Well, within the film, it's a little bit hard to explain why they're so interested in these sculptures, which are, unbelievably awful. But I think it's supposed to be the existential question there is of death, of this kind of existential angst, and it's really this idea of sculpture as death, and this equation of sculpture and death within the film becomes so interesting. I mean, there's very long tradition in the history of sculpture of the story of Pygmalion and Galatea, which is basically the fantasy of making sculpture, dead matter, come to life. And this whole tradition from, as I say, from Greek mythology up through Frankenstein and in Twilight Zone episodes and all of this stuff of making the immaterial or making the non-living turn to life. This idea of the artist as somebody who brings life into inert matter. And that's also in some of the phrases of the poet who's doing these readings in the beginning of the film.
I will talk to you of art, for there is nothing else to talk about, for there is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art. Burn gas buggies and whip your sour cream of circumstance and hope, and go ahead and sleep your bloody heads off. Creation is, all else is not. What is not creation is graham crackers. Let it all crumble to feed the creator.
Like a lot of exaggerations, there's some grains of truth in there. I mean, it puts in all of the things that, this kind of fear factor about the beats that, they're all about drugs and that there's danger lurking under this kind of subculture. And, but, in some ways, some of the characters aren't that far from characters that you see in a few of the actual Beat movies that were made at right about the same time.
All these are Beat. All these you'll meet in a bucket of blood.
Let us make the scene. Crazy.
Come to the land of living dreams, where realists dream of the unreal.
Walter, you've done something to me. Something deep down inside of my prana. Oh, Walter, I want to be with you. You're creative.
Beatniks at their bawdiest. The creative urge at its most primitive. I'm deeply moved, and I shall compose a poem. Love is art. Art is love. It's the weirdest and the wildest.
Problems that sculpture has always presented in the history of modernist art, that sculpture is so literal and real and material and has caused a lot of problems. It's always been a very awkward fit for modernist theories of art, which are so optical and virtual. So that awkwardness of how sculpture fits into modernist theories of art creates a lot of interesting aspects to be explored.
Canvas is a canvas or a painting. A rock is a rock or a statue. A sound is a sound or it's music.
This film, and one of the things that's so interesting about it really is that it inverts that whole tradition of an artist as someone who takes inert matter, takes inert lumps of clay, and brings artistic life into them, but metaphorically brings real life into them. It's a subject, the theme of so many stories. And in this film, it's the opposite. The artist takes life and through his art makes death. Kills people, and the sculpture is the encasing of these animals and people, and so it's a kind of inversion of this Pygmalion story, and also becomes a kind of send up of all of this pretentious rhetoric about spontaneity and life and never repeating yourself and being free form art and all of these things.
You mean you don't remember your own poem?
I refuse to say anything twice. Repetition is death.
Oh, get it.
When you repeat something, you are reliving a moment, wasting it, severing it from the other end of your life. I believe only in new impressions, new stimuli, new life.
I thought you believed that life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on a...
I do believe that, Walter, but I also believe creative living. To be uncreative, you might as well be in your grave. Or in the army.
They tried to draft me once. I couldn't pass the test.
Walter, Leonard's looking at you.
He's just my god.
One of the things, it's always very easy to mock the art world, because the art world is riddled with pretensions of all kind, but this idea of genius, which is so key in this kind of rhetoric of that. No, you've struck it. Now you're a genius artist. Is one of the things that kind of reached a high point in the 1950s in the public mind with abstract expressionism and figures like Jackson Pollock, who were just thought of as an inspired genius. And these great scenes in the beginning of the film where Walter, he has no inspiration. He's sitting there at his table with his clay. He doesn't know what to do. He's just, he's trying to make a head, but he can't. And it's like he's just waiting for inspiration. Then the inspiration comes in the form of this cat crying from within, plastered within the walls. But it's such a kind of ridiculous moment of the artist searching for and then finding inspiration, and how kind of corrupt and phony that whole notion of inspiration and artistic genius really is.
Oh, let's change the subject. I'm sick of hearing about sculpture. Nobody knows how to do that anymore, much less the busboy from the Yellow Door.
Who do you think you're talking about?
Don't shout at me.
I don't like you.
Nobody asked for your opinion, Walter. You're just a simple little farm boy, and the rest of us are all sophisticated beatniks.
That's all, man. Let's split. Yeah, man. I gotta make me some air. You make them leave.
What did I do?
The first beneficial service of your benighted life. It proves we're all good for something.
Are you saying that this busboy is better than I?
Yes.
I think this whole bit about him being a sculptor is just a big put-on for my benefit.
That's not true. I am a sculptor.
Oh, yeah? Prove it. Make something out of this.
There. Hand.
That isn't a real hand. If you were a sculptor, you'd create something for me.
Of this issue of whether it's fraudulent to cast from the body. That becomes one of the things in this film, is that Walter is accused of being a fraud because he's found out to be a murderer, but also a fraud because he hasn't really made these sculptures. He's just laid clay over actual bodies. And there's a famous scandal or an accusation really in the history of art with the French sculptor Auguste Rodin, who was accused, this is in the late 19th century, that one of his sculptures looked so lifelike that one critic accused him of that you must have cast this from life. You must have cast this from an actual body and not sculpted it yourself. And it wasn't a true accusation, but just the idea that this was somehow, as always, the vulnerable for attack if you're doing figurative work like that the idea that you would be shown to be a fraud if you were actually casting from the body as opposed to creating it from your own spirit, from your own mind. And so that's one of the things that I was reminded of in watching this film.
How do you like my cat?
You make this thing mad?
Uh-huh. It's crazy. Crazy. You want to buy it?
A way of thinking about sculpture in terms of the found object that starts to become more and more important at this time in a variety of sculptural practices of not creating from the inspiration where you just gush out from your own mind, from your own soul, and in the way that poetry is happening in the film, or the way that Walter tries to when he first tries and fails to make sculpture, that the process of making art is about working with what's there, with finding, rearranging, reinterpreting, reworking what's already out there, the objects, forms, and vernacular that's already out there. And one of those things that's already out there is the body, which is a little bit along the lines of Walter and the cat, but it's not. What Walter does is he takes, a dead cat and pretends it covers it in clay and pretends it's his own inspired interior art. This whole idea of interiority, the artists pouring out themselves. And what Rauschenberg and Kienholz and all these other disparate kind of artists are doing is sort of denying this kind of interiority. They're kind of playing with forms as they are and objects as they are to be assembled, rather than some fantasy that it's all created from an inspired, almost spiritual genius on the inside. So it's a real interest in vernacular objects and vernacular processes and practices.
Oh, what's the matter, Frankie? How'd you get yourself stuck in a wall? Wait a minute, I'll get you out.
And there's always a lot of disillusioned, disgruntled artists like Walter, waiting for their break, waiting to find their inspiration. But the idea of that inspiration is in itself a kind of fantasy, often anyway.